Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Well, it's going to be all politics today as we try to digest what happened, why it happened, and what happens next. Why did President Obama win? Why did Tommy Thompson lose? And what's going to happen now that the Republicans control everything in Madison? Let me introduce our guest today. Of course, we have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally with us. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. You know Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's get right into it. But let's be courteous and respectful today. No gloating, no
crying.
Out people.
I just have on my happy face with
not interrupting one another, please, today. First things first. The people have spoken, and the majority have said they want Barack Obama to continue as president. Was Romney the wrong guy, or did people simply reject the program he was selling, Denise?
I think it was a bit of both. I do think he was the wrong guy. And it was also the program that he was selling. And the problem for Governor Romney, as we've talked about a number of times here, is depending on whether or not it was the primary or depending upon whether or not it was a general election, he had two different programs he was selling. And I think people saw that. I think what we saw in this election was the fact that people want to be able to know what their candidate is going to be about, that their candidate isn't going to flip-flop and say one thing to one group of people and then say another thing to another group. I think when we look back on this, there are two things that will really help us in terms of understanding why President Obama won. First is they're very, very, very smart in terms of how they approached this whole campaign. They took a very calculated risk to spend 20% of their advertising budget, 20% of their money that they had allotted for advertising between the time of the end of the primaries for Republicans and the convention. So they had the opportunity to begin to shape in people's minds who Mitt Romney was and what he was about. They concentrated everything they had on those battleground states and on the get out the vote piece. And what they did in terms of the get out the vote was phenomenal. You actually had, for example, in Ohio, you had more African Americans and more Latinos voting than in 2008. So before the election, there was this whole discussion of whether or not there was malaise and whether or not there was energy and excitement amongst the Democrats. There sure was, because they turned people out with a machine that, quite frankly, I think when people look at this campaign years from now, they'll say this is the way that you run a campaign and it's the way you win an election.
Kevin, why didn't Romney get the black vote? Why didn't Romney get the Hispanic vote? Why didn't Romney get the female vote?
Because Republicans never get the black vote and they never get the Hispanic vote and probably never will. And why didn't they get the women vote? It's because of the war on women, I think a phony war on women that was waged and people bought into it. Now, if you're going to ask, well, should Republicans go back to the drawing map and rethink things? On this program 2 years ago at this time, during the midterm elections, when President Obama said his party got a shellacking, I didn't see the left go back and reconfigure their strategy. They stuck to their principles, and I would hope that conservatives would too. Do conservatives have a problem with those groups you mentioned? Of course, but I don't think the answer is for conservatives to move to the center. It's to try to get people in the center to move towards them, towards the right. Will that be easy? Will that be quick? No, that's going to take some work to tailor that kind of message. But to my fellow conservatives, I mean, this is an election. You win some, you lose some. The Democrats, who traditionally, historically, always do well in getting out the vote, did a phenomenal job this time. The conventional wisdom on my side of the aisle was that there was no way that the Democrats could match the 2008 kind of turnout. They came close. The president got 8 million less votes this time around, but it was enough to eke out a victory. So I don't think there's a mandate, and I don't think my fellow conservatives should be on the ledge and should be whining and complaining. Stick to your conservative principles. And yes, get a candidate. We've run the last two races, moderates, and look what happened. I think we need to, if we're going to go back to the drawing board, rethink that strategy.
Is this going to force the Republicans in Congress to be more cooperative and negotiate more, or is it going to be just like it has been for the last few years?
I think it depends on what program aspect you look at. First off, kudos. You all called it right. I totally missed the boat. Mostly because I thought the Republicans were going to have a better ground game. We did not. 2 to 3 million fewer votes than in 2008 for Romney. And I think there had been a calculation that the Republicans were going to have the same kind of turnout, given the perception that McCain was not a better candidate than Romney would be. I think the strategy of using the Great Lakes states, which were for the most part the contested states, and boost turnout in urban areas, it paid off big time. I never thought that I would live to see 87% turnout in the city of Milwaukee. I think it was tremendous. I hope that it's something that continues. I also hope that the Republican Party can reach out and begin to extend that message that they had of lower taxes, of more jobs to those communities. To your question, I think if it's immigration policy, the Republicans are going to work with the president to shape something that they can both live with. If it's tax policy, I think they're going to be at odds with each other over that, because there's no indication that the Republicans are going to give ground on that. There's no indication that the president is going to give ground. I don't even think that with the impending fiscal crisis that they're going to reach much of a compromise until just at that last moment when someone blinks. If you're talking about the Supreme Court nominations, anywhere from 1 to 3 nominations, you're going to have the Dems that will actually have a pretty strong hand because they control the Senate. There may be, on some, an attempt to filibuster. I don't put that past them. I just don't think we've got the kind of leadership that is gutsy enough to do it.
Is the fact that Romney was a rich white guy, did that hurt him?
Sure it did, because he was against taxing rich white guys and letting rich white guys pay lower taxes than the middle class. That's insulting. When the Republicans point out, well, that wouldn't raise a whole lot of money and solve our deficit. No, but it's totally unfair that the richest people in America are paying lower taxes than ordinary people. And you know, I'm sorry to hear Republicans not wise up, because I keep telling them, I keep telling Republicans what they need to do. The Republicans this
Sorry,
time.
but no thanks,
I
Joel.
know, you don't listen to me, but let me tell you, you won 60% of the white vote this time, and that was
61.
not enough to win a presidential election. You
You're
can't
right.
drive away from your party African Americans, Latinos, women, young people, college-educated white people. You can't drive all those people away from your party by having, I'm sorry, Kevin, you be the face of the Republican Party or Rush Limbaugh be the face of the Republican Party. That is insulting to the people of the United States. We're talking about messages of hate. We're talking about messages of denigrating other races and other people. We're talking about denying, when you oppose the DREAM Act for Latinos, these are children who are brought here as babies.
That will pass.
Well, it certainly should, but Mitt Romney shouldn't have said he would veto it. And no wonder the Republicans lost, you know, they only got less than, I think, 30% of the Latino vote, the fastest growing minority vote in America. You simply do not recognize that this is not the party of angry old white men anymore.
Well, at least one of you two is gracious tonight.
That's not gracious. I'm trying to help you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
That kind of help we don't.
Now let's talk about Tammy Baldwin defeating Tommy Thompson. Did she simply ride in on the coattails of President Obama, or did she win because she ran a brilliant, very expensive campaign with a message that appealed to the most people?
Now, see, you're going to make me cry. I was surprised. I actually thought there would be crossover votes. Again, both Joel and Denise were correct in noting that it wasn't. Had there been crossover votes, I think there would have been a better chance that Thompson would have won it. Had there been, I think, a better ground game, again, on the part of the Republicans, that would have borne out as well. That being said, she did one thing that I think was brilliant, she came out of the blocks right away. During the primary time, she defined who Tommy Thompson was for voters from her perspective, from her campaign's perspective, and they were relentless in painting that picture. There was an awful lot of money that did come in to support her. I think they did a brilliant job in raising money. And then they had the great fortune of connecting with the president's campaign. They were joined at the hip. And that, to me, especially in Milwaukee, Dane County, Kenosha County, I think it paid off.
Was anybody actually voting for Tammy Baldwin, or were they simply voting for Obama, and then she was in the same column?
They were absolutely voting for Tammy Baldwin. She is a very good candidate. You guys didn't recognize that all the time. You kept saying, well, you know, she came out and she advertised a lot against Tommy and she denigrated Tommy. But she was also the future. She was bright. She was young. She was vibrant, as opposed to this guy who was running on the past. And she was the vote for the future. And I've heard for years that she is a brilliant campaigner, and I believe it after this race. The Tommy thing, I think Tommy was hurt by a couple things. One is that he was running this time as a millionaire, and that is not who people remember Tommy Thompson as. They remember Tommy Thompson as somebody like them. And she correctly defined him as someone who'd become a multimillionaire representing people in Washington. And you ask about Mitt Romney, did that hurt him? Yes, it hurt him, and I think Mitt Romney hurt Tommy Thompson, because here we had two millionaires, one on the state level and one on the national level, running at a time when people have become very aware of the income inequality in this country and the fact that the middle class is getting screwed over while the rich get richer. And pay less.
But she was certainly helped by Obama's popularity.
Well, she was helped by his popularity, but I think she is a strong campaigner. She's a strong campaigner. In addition to the ground game that she was able to pick up on with the president, she also had an incredibly strong ground game herself. They were highly organized in terms of the work that they were doing around getting out the vote. They were very organized in terms of defining her as a candidate. The efforts by some to call her extreme as a reference to the fact that she's a lesbian, I think backfired. I think people were offended by it. You know, people were smart enough to know what was being said, and it offended them because at the end of the day, her sexual orientation had nothing to do with the way people felt, what she stood for, and the way people felt that she would be represented. So was she helped by President Obama to some extent? Absolutely. But she was also helped, quite frankly, quite a bit by the Republicans.
If there was a strong, young Republican candidate, could that person have beat Tammy Baldwin?
I think so, and I will concede here this evening that what might have helped do in Tommy was the fact that he was much older and that he had been removed from his last statewide race by at least a dozen, maybe more, maybe 14 years, if my math is correct. And Tommy has an amazing record for what he's done for the state of Wisconsin. But people also want to know what you're going to do for us in the future. And I didn't think his campaign had the right amount of balance between your great past and what you're going to do if you are elected to the United States Senate. This was a bitter, nasty campaign. Both sides. Tommy got dragged into that. And I don't think that's his style. He admitted that on election night, that he was uncomfortable, you know, going in there and going toe to toe and beating up his opponent while she was trying to beat up him. Tommy is the cheerleader, the ambassador for the state of Wisconsin. That's what he likes to do. And I think this was a very, very uncomfortable campaign. Not only the general, but the primary too.
Can anybody run for a big office now, Congress, the governor, Senate, without raising tens of millions of dollars ever again?
I don't see how.
Yeah, I don't see how you can. But, you know, the other thing that we found out from this campaign, particularly on the presidential level, but to an extent with Tammy Baldwin as well, because Crossroads GPS was doing its fair share of advertising against her, is that you cannot spend a lot of money and expect that that is going to mean that you're going to be able to have your candidate elected. People, and I think I said this a number of weeks ago, people are insulted by the fact that we think that there's one teeny issue and one teeny kernel of information about someone in the grand scheme of who they are and what they want to be able to do that will cause us to make a difference in terms of who we want to vote for. So I think you cannot buy an election. That was clear from the amount of money that came in here for Republicans, both statewide and nationally.
Well, think about this with the money. Think about this since we're talking money. And this should be, I think, disappointing to anyone, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. On the national level, both campaigns, they spent $6 billion. We were bombarded like no time in our history with ads. Each side spent $30 per second on ads, $6 billion worth. And what have we got? A Democrat in the White House, the Senate being run by the Democrats, and the House being run by Republicans. Absolutely nothing.
But I think something has changed.
A lot has changed.
A lot has
changed because so much of that money was spent on ugliness that I really think this is one positive thing, that all of that ugly advertising didn't move people the way that the professionals always say that it does. They say they run negative ads because they work. Well, we were flooded with negative ads, and it wasn't the negative ads in Wisconsin that decided this election. It was an upbeat candidate, and it was a candidate that had been around too long and sadly had run just like one race too many. I thought, Tommy's concession speech where he named everybody in the room that he'd ever known, I thought it was a sad moment. But the truth of the matter is, the future, was served, and a positive, upbeat campaign won over the other.
And I think it's a reminder to Paul Ryan, particularly when you consider the fact that not only did he lose Wisconsin, he lost in his own hometown. That it's not enough to be young and vibrant. You have to have ideas that speak to where people are, not where you want them to be.
I think his future is bright.
All right, now,
it's a little dull today.
Explain this to me. How does the same state that voted for Obama and Baldwin not too long ago, they elected Scott Walker governor, not once, but twice, and now that same electorate has given control of the entire state legislature to Republicans? Explain that.
That one was one that I had difficulty understanding too. I do think that redistricting played a role, but not the entire role. But it was significant, and we knew that going into the election that redistricting was going to play a part. But redistricting every 10 years always plays a part, depending on who's in control of the legislature. It played a part for the Dems being able to have control when they were in control of the legislature after the 2000 census. The candidates that were recruited for the Republicans, I think, were good candidates. That made a difference. Oftentimes in those races, in Senate races, they were running against weaker candidates. And certainly in the Assembly, where hardly any seats were lost, that made a difference. You have to recruit good candidates. You have to finance them. You've got to have a strong campaign team behind them. I think all those things made a difference for the Republicans in both the Assembly and in the Senate.
Okay, the Republicans will push mining legislation through. What other big ticket items are out there?
Mining will be right out of the chute. And I think because I'll get to that, but mining, all those thousands of jobs can no longer be ignored. Key in this discussion is you had Dale Schultz, the Republican senator who was the main obstructionist for the mining bill in the last session. Even if he votes no on any mining bill, the Republicans will control the Senate 18-15, so his vote there will not be as critical as last time. Also, there will be more money for education. How much, I don't know, that's not been decided yet, but the state of Wisconsin is in really good shape, and I think that's why conservatives can smile. That's why Republicans do control everything now, because economically we're in good stead. We have $261 million surplus that will be adjusted up or down in a couple of weeks when the Legislative Fiscal Bureau comes out with the new numbers. That's on top of the $125 million that we just put in the rainy day fund. Haven't done that, I don't think, I don't even know how long. So there will be an increase in funding towards education. Look for the Republicans to push for across-the-board income tax cuts. And there will be obviously an effort to come through with a very, very strong budget that will be balanced without a structural deficit. And there will be, I really believe this, I believe there will be a stronger push to have bipartisanship, even though Republicans control everything.
Well, do the Democrats worry there'll be any big bombs drop, like the death sentence or right-to-work state, something like that?
I don't know about that, but I'll tell you why Republicans are going to be doing more to reach across the aisle, and it's in the numbers. We've talked before about how when we take a look at the fact that Governor Walker was reelected during the recall, we've talked about how the fact that that was a different campaign. Here's a number that shows that. 23 counties in Wisconsin who voted for Governor Walker in the recall voted for President Obama this time around. So I think that Republicans, if they're taking a look at the maps and they're seeing what's happening, they're realizing two things. Number one, the recall was an anomaly in terms of how people looked at that race, because it wasn't just about whether or not you wanted to vote for Tom Barrett or you wanted to vote against Scott Walker. A lot of people made a decision about the fact, you know what, I don't think this is something that rises to the level of a recall. So I think we are more of a purple state than we realize. But I also think taking a look at the presidential election in those 23 counties is a message to Republicans that, you know, we voted this way, but we can also vote. We can also vote for Democrats. And so I think it's a sign for them that if they try to do some of the same things, the same, you know, dropping the bomb that happened 2 years ago, we can expect that we're going to see come 2 years from now in 2012, I think we can expect to see some movement, and the Republicans may not control both parts of the House.
Speculation, two different animals. If the Barrett-Walker recall race would have been on this ballot, would Barrett have won?
I don't know. I don't have any way of interpreting that. I think because the electorate was entirely different than voted in the recall, there would be more of a chance of that. But that's almost neither here nor there. The truth of the matter is, the reason why the Republicans still control the legislature, it was the redistricting. There's no question about that. And there's still lawsuits out there, and there's still illegal things they did, and there'll be a big Supreme Court race coming up, within this next year. That may change the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court may actually have to get some ethics instead of being the unethical Republican Supreme Court that it is now. But I don't think there's going to be, I don't think the Republican legislature is going to be as vicious and, run roughshod over the laws and over the opposition the way they did, coming out of Walker's first budget. It was ugly. It alienated so many people in the state. And some of the things they did, like, trying to deny people the right to vote, so alienated people that I think the fact that they tried to keep African Americans, Latinos, and poor people and old people, from voting in the numbers they had in the past, I think that's what made them even more determined to turn out in this presidential election, and they made a difference.
All right, we move on. A few more thoughts now on the election night and what it all means. Writing and editing consultant Rick Horowitz gave his TV remote a real workout these past few days. And some of what he heard, well, at least it was entertaining. Rick.
Sum it all up in 2 minutes? No way. So let's just bust a few fantasies before they take root, okay? A few quick sprays of myths be gone. Okay, first myth, the election was a squeaker. Fact. President Obama won by 3 million votes. Fact, out of 9 battleground states, Obama won 8. Fact, the president's electoral college margin was more than 3 times larger than George W. Bush's 2 margins combined. And winning this big in the face of a still sluggish economy and a 4-year-long Republican effort to obstruct, insult, and delegitimize him, it was an extraordinary vote of confidence. Second myth, it was all Hurricane Sandy's fault and Chris Christie's fault. Sandy stopped Mitt Romney's momentum. Fact, Mitt Romney's momentum had already stopped. Look at the polls. Romney's bump after the first debate was already disappearing, after the president won the second debate and the third debate, and after those strong jobs numbers. President Obama was already extending his lead before a single grain of sand ever moved on the Jersey Shore. Those are facts. Besides, if your whole attack is based on such a shaky premise that Obama can't reach across the aisle, that grateful words from one Republican governor, even one very large Republican governor, can blow it to smithereens, then you're already skewed, aren't you? Oh, and another myth, this election was the end of traditional America. What are you, Iroquois? Apache? Or does GOP really stand for guard our pigment? Here's the thing, saying things that aren't true doesn't make them true, not even if you say them over and over in a louder voice. But that's been the Republican approach for years, from the candidates and the strategists, from the Tea Party Taliban, from the talk show yackers who preferred rating points to reality. They dismissed the facts they didn't like, the polls they didn't like. They invented their own reality, and they paid the price. See, lying to the voters was bad enough, but lying to themselves was even more dangerous. So now they've got to make a choice, data or denial, Nate Silver or fool's gold.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, stay dry, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.